Hello, everyone. I think we are ready to start. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to start the video. Of course, you will be able to replay this. You'll be sent a link to the recorded version, and you'll be able to replay this whenever you want. Okay, so at this point, everyone should be able to see the video. Unfortunately, I won't be able to see the chat. So if you add something to the chat, I will be able to read your comments at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to start with explaining the different types of chocolate. So what I have here is what we call candy melts, and they come in different colors. And what you need to know about candy melts is that they are the only types of chocolate that don't need to be tempered. So you can melt them and reuse them over and over again, and you don't need to worry about the tempering. And what I have here is chocolate chips, and I decided to demonstrate how to temper chocolate chips for the reason that you can actually find them anywhere. And the third type that I don't have on video is what we call couverture chocolate, which is like the brand Calbo. And it's basically more expensive than other types of chocolate, and it needs to be tempered. Now I'm going to show you how I temper my chocolate and without using a candy thermometer. And so this applies to chocolate chips and the couverture chocolate. Again, candy melts don't need to be tempered. Okay, so just a second. Okay, so what I have here, so I'm going to show you how I temper the chocolate chips, but this applies to the couverture chocolate as well. And what I start to do is, so you can do this using two methods. First, I have about a cup and a half of chocolate chips, and I remove a half a cup. And I have some boiling water. I'm using the double boiler method. You can absolutely do this in the microwave, but avoid doing this directly on the stove because you will burn the chocolate and you will have like little pieces and chunks of burnt chocolate in your chocolate, and it's not going to be smooth, and it's going to be really pretty to work with. So what I do is I start melting my chocolate over a double boiler method. This takes more time than the microwave and to actually be placing the pan on the stove. So whenever the chocolate melts, you're going to remove it from the double boiler and you're going to start gradually adding the remaining chocolate chips. And you're going to add more chocolate chips when the previous batch melts. So when the previous batch fully melts, you're going to add a bit more. And what you're going to realize is that with each batch you add, the melting process is going to be slower. So whenever it takes you several minutes to actually melt the remaining chocolate, you're going to know that this is the last batch. Usually it takes me from 3 to 4 small batches until the chocolate is tempered. So this is the method you can use to avoid using a candy thermometer, because using a candy thermometer is more complicated than actually using this method. So now that I have my whole chocolate melted, So what I'm showing you here is, this is the color mill white color. So usually when you're using couverture chocolate or chocolate chips, it melts with a yellowish tone. So to make it white, you're gonna use a oil-based color, the oil-based color white. So when it comes to chocolate, you can only use oil-based colors. You can never use gel colors or watercolors. And Color Mill is actually a good brand because you can use it with everything. So you can use it with to color fondant, buttercream, your cake batter, so everything. And here I'm showing you, this is the couverture chocolate which I'm using for this project. And as you can see, the texture differs. So I'm also adding the Color Mill. Also, if you want to add, make this white, you're gonna add Color Mill. But for this project, I'm gonna add the nude color. And as you can see with the texture of couverture chocolate, it's thinner than candy melts and chocolate chips. And couverture chocolate melts easier, but it takes more time to set. Candy melts take more time to melt, but they set easier. So what I'm doing, I added a few drops of Color Mill, the color nude, and we are ready to pour this into our mold. So the mold I'm using here is linked in the PDF you received. And what I do is I use my brush to cover the sides. Covering the sides is something really important when it comes to Cakesicles. Because if you have thin sides, the Cakesicle is gonna crack when you remove it. So what I'm doing is I'm covering the sides. You can use a spoon, a knife, whatever. Whatever you like to use. I find that a brush to be the easiest tool to use. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tap, and the remaining chocolate will set on the bottom. So we are gonna have a bit of a thick layer on the bottom and a thin layer on the side, but we're gonna apply a second coat on the side. So before your chocolate sets, you're gonna add the Cakesicle stick. Now, there are a few tips that I would like to share at this stage. So if you are using candy melts at this stage, because candy melts do not need tempering, you can pop the mold in the fridge at this stage to allow the chocolate to set faster. If you are using chocolate chips or couverture chocolate, these types of chocolate need to be tempered. So usually when you pop tempered chocolate in the fridge, they do state that it ruins the tempering. So the method that works for me, because basically if you are a baker and you're selling your baked goods, it's gonna take too much time for the chocolate to set at room temperature. Usually tempered chocolate would take from 20 to 30 minutes to fully set at room temperature. And since we have a bit of a thick layer on the bottom, it's gonna take more time, which is gonna be very time consuming. So what I find a method that works for me would be to allow the chocolate to set at room temperature for a few minutes. And you're gonna see, since the texture of couverture chocolate is a bit thin, you're gonna see that when it starts to set, it's gonna have the same texture as candy melts. So when it arrives to this stage, you're safe to place it in the fridge. And this would make the process faster. So you're gonna set this in the freezer, and whenever it sets, we're gonna add a second layer on the sides. So to make the sides thicker, this is very important so that the Cakesicle doesn't break whenever we're removing it. So at this stage, you're gonna realize that the chocolate is already setting too fast because the first layer is already too cold. And to make sure that all your sides are fully covered, what I do is I take my mold and put it to the light, and you can see if you have some gaps, you can fill them. And what I'm doing here is simply cleaning the edges with my spatula. And at this stage, you're gonna set your, let me pause for a second. At this stage, you're gonna set your mold in the freezer for just a few minutes to make sure that the second coat is set. So what I have here is the chocolate transfer sheets. These are, you can find these on the Sugar Art website, and this is the Angela Morrison collection. So you need to look chocolate transfer sheets. So you're gonna prepare, you're gonna cut your sheet prior actually going through with the filling process. I'm gonna explain why later. So you're just gonna cut the sheet using a pair of scissors, as simple as that. And make sure that how you cut the sheet would be enough to cover the Cakesicle design that you are using. So what I have here is a piece of cake. So I make cakes for my channel, so I freeze pieces of cakes, and this would be a great ratio for cake pops. Now, if you're making this from scratch and you do not have any cake pieces sitting in the freezer, the right ratio would be 3 cups of crumbled cake to 1/3 of a cup of frosting or buttercream. And you can do this by hand, or you can simply place the cake in your mixer and then add the buttercream. And if you add too much buttercream, you can just add more cake. And if you feel like the texture is dry, you can add more buttercream. This is the texture you're looking for. You don't need to be too sticky, and you don't need it to be too dry. So at this point, I am filling the Cakesicle. You need to make sure to try and fill under the cake stick, because we placed the cake stick before the chocolate set. The reason why I place my Cakesicle ahead is because if you place it after the chocolate sets, it's going to break on the bottom as well. And you're going to leave about 1/2 centimeter. So you're not going to fill this all the way through in order to have a cleaner finish. If you fill this way too much, you're not going to be able to smooth it out when you add the chocolate, and you're not going to have a clean finish because the cake is going to transfer on the chocolate. So before we add the remaining chocolate, I have a few tips to share. First tip would be if you're using cold cake or whatever cold filling, allow the filling to be at room temperature, especially when using the transfer sheet method. The reason why we do this, because when you're going to add your chocolate to something that is cold, it's going to set too fast. With this method, you're going to need more time to smooth out the chocolate and then add the sheet. And you're going to see later how I do that. So you need to give the chocolate as much time as you can in order to get a clean finish. So allow your cake pop batter to be at room temperature. And when you're using candy melts, as I've mentioned earlier, candy melts set faster than couverture chocolate. Now at this stage, either your candy melts or your remaining chocolate might have set since you've been working for a few minutes now. If you're using candy melts, you can reuse these, just simply melt them back in the microwave. If you are using couverture chocolate or chocolate chips, you're going to need to temper these again. And I forgot to mention it earlier, since I used the double boiler method. If you have a microwave, it's going to be easier. What you're going to do is you're going to put the first batch of chocolate in the microwave. Whenever it melts, you're going to proceed with the same procedures as with the double boiler. So if you're using candy melts, you can reheat them. If you're using couverture chocolate, just make sure that you do the tempering again. So we're going to add our melted chocolate on the back of the Cakesicle. So at this point, if you are not adding the sheet, the only difference is that you're going to use less chocolate. So you can add this amount right here, and you're going to use your spatula and smooth it out over and over again until you have a smooth finish. But when you're using chocolate sheets, you're going to add a bit more chocolate, because you need the whole chocolate the whole surface of the Cakesicle to actually touch the sheet. Now you can't see this on camera when I add the sheet, but I'm gonna try to explain it as much as I can. Now, as you can see here, we have some air bubbles, and we're gonna get rid of these before we add the sheet. And the reason we do that, as you can see, I'm still adding a bit more chocolate because this might like form some edges, there's some excess, but that's going to be okay because we're going to fix it later. So I'm popping the air bubble using my trusting needle. You can use a toothpick, whatever you have. And the reason why I try to get rid of as many air bubbles as I can is because when the chocolate sets and the sheet, you need to remove the sheet, you're going to realize that it has some tiny holes in the chocolate, and that's not going to look pretty. So at this point, we're adding the sheet. I don't know if you can see this on camera, but you can see where the chocolate actually touches the sheet. And this is why we add more chocolate than we need with like regular Cakesicles. And you're going to gently press on the sheet to make sure that it is 100% covering the chocolate. So make sure you prepare your sheet and cut it prior adding the chocolate on the back of the Cakesicle, just to make sure that everything is ready, because you want to try to work as fast as you can. So at this point, we're going to add the mold back in the freezer, and we're going to allow it to set. And we're going to prepare the fondant that we're going to cover the Cakesicle with. So I'm using the nude, the same nude that I used to color the chocolate. And I have a piece of fondant. And again, I repeat that with Color Mill, it's great because you can use their colors for chocolate, for buttercream, for fondant, for cake batters, not with meringues. So what I'm doing is simply kneading the fondant to make sure that the color is combined. And I'm going to dust my surface with cornstarch, also known as corn flour. And I'm simply using a makeup brush. And you're gonna roll this out to a bit of a thin, you need it to be a bit thin. If it's still sticky on the surface, just add more cornstarch. Avoid using powdered sugar, because powdered sugar sometimes add more moisture to the fondant, which is going to be a bit, it's not going to be as easy to work with when you're using cornstarch. And here I'm using an embosser, and I link this in the PDF as well. Now this usually comes with a cutter, but I'm only going to use the embosser, and you're going to create the pattern that you want. Now make sure that you press enough to create the pattern, but not too much so you don't cut through the fondant. If it sticks, you can add cornstarch to the embosser itself, and you're going to create the pattern that you want. Okay, so this is the pattern we have. And we are ready to remove the transfer sheet. Now this is super easy to remove, by the way. Whenever the chocolate sets, it's super easy to remove. And as you can see, we have some excess, and we're gonna clean this out. So whenever you want to remove your Cakesicle from the mold, you're gonna start with the sides. When the chocolate sets, you're gonna see that the sides they're just gonna separate from the mold by themselves, and just push on the bottom. And you're gonna use the Cakesicle stick to remove the Cakesicle from the mold. And I'm using my X-Acto knife to remove the excess we created. Now, again, when you're not using the chocolate transfer sheets, you're not going to have any excess because you're going to be able to smooth out the back of the Cakesicle and remove any excess chocolate. So with this method, it might just create any excess. So simply use your X-Acto knife or a knife to remove any excess. And now I'm just adding vegetable shortening on the chocolate so that we are able to add the fondant pattern that we created. So make sure that you add the vegetable shortening throughout the Cakesicle and simply place this, and you're going to smooth it out with your hands. Don't press too much in order not to ruin the pattern. And you're going to go to the sides. And then using my X-Acto knife, I'm just going to remove any excess. And this is how it is on the back. You can just make sure that it is 100% sticking to the surface of the chocolate. And what I'm doing here is I am adding vegetable shortening where I want to add these are some edible gold leaves. Of course, the decoration can be whatever you want it to be. And this is the final result we have on the back. Now, when you flip this over to work on the front, I place the Cakesicle on a tissue paper just to make sure that it doesn't, just to make sure that the chocolate doesn't touch any wet surfaces, so it doesn't get ruined. And I'm just using an edible pearl dust just to give that pearl effect on the fondant. The pearl dust is from New York Cake. I'm not sure I linked this in the PDF, but it's from New York Cake and it's fully edible. So I'm just adding some dust using the makeup brush I use. And I'm gonna use a bow mold to create the little bow we added on the Cakesicle stick. And what I do is the mold is also linked. So what I do is I dust the mold with cornstarch, of course, and I'm adding, you can use fondant or you can use gum paste if you have gum paste. And you're just gonna push the gum paste or fondant in the mold to make sure that you get all the details. Now, usually you need to do any details a day ahead. So like the bow, for example, they had, but since I was filming, I did this the same day, and I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna show you later on. So here I have a gold luster dust. This is from Christine's molds as well. This is not edible, but it's not toxic, so it's mainly used for decorating purposes. And I add a few drops of alcohol. Now I use vodka. If you're someone who doesn't like to use alcohol, you can absolutely use some lemon extract. But I use vodka. So this is like a better option since it dries faster. The consistency you're looking for is like a thick paint. You don't want this to be like a drip because it's going to be really sheer on the bow itself. So when you're using like a thick paint consistency, it's gonna create, you're only gonna need one coat. And so this is where I usually you would let this dry at room temperature, but I didn't allow it to dry. And you're gonna simply add this on the cakesicle. Now it's gonna stick to the fondant because both fondants didn't dry yet. But something I do to add fondant details on the cake stick itself is to I use a fresh piece of fondant and I stick it there and then it sticks there. So this is the final result. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I'm able to answer any questions you have. Okay. Please, if anyone has any questions. So again, you're going to be able to replay this whenever you want. But if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute your microphones and ask away. If the gold luster dust is not edible, can the fondant just be dusted with something else that is edible? Absolutely. I only used the unedible gold dust on the bow, which can be removed. The pearl dust that I used on the fondant is 100% edible. So you can absolutely use something edible, but the unedible range is more intense in colors. So when you can add it to decorations, it's going to be it's going to look better, especially when the decoration can be simply removed. Just make sure you tell your customers that it is not edible. You're welcome. If you wish to exit the class, you can do so. If you would like to receive the personalized certificate, make sure to, I'm gonna leave my email in the chat. So make sure to email me there and I can send it to you with your full name. And if you have any questions, you can find me on Instagram and you can reach out by email. I'll be happy to assist you. Before placing the transfer sheet on the chocolate, do you let it set first before adding? No, you need to add the transfer sheet before the chocolate sets. The chocolate needs to be fully melted before you add the chocolate transfer sheet. This is why I stated that the filling of the cakesicle should be at room temperature so that you have time to actually work through this. If the filling is cold, the chocolate is going to set way too fast, which is not going to give you enough time to smooth out the back of the cakesicle if you're not using transfer sheets. So you need enough time to actually smooth out the back of the cakesicle to get that clean finish. And if you're using transfer sheets, it's going to give you more time to actually add the transfer sheet. So the chocolate needs to be fully melted before you add the transfer sheet. Otherwise, it's not going to transfer on the chocolate. The sheet doesn't actually transfer on chocolate that has already set. You're welcome. Anyone has any other questions? Any tips for those who are just starting out making cakesicles? Um, well, my first tip would be start with candy melts. They're easier to use, and basically you can reuse them and reheat them. For example, let's say you're using my favorite would be couverture chocolate because like it has a thinner consistency and it's more delicious. But the problem with that is since it needs to be tempered, you're just gonna whenever it sets, you're gonna need to temper it again. So let's say what I do, for example, in order not to have any waste. So whenever the batch I have set, I melt that batch and I add more chocolate to in order to temper it. With candy melts, you're not going to need to temper them. So whenever you're working and the chocolate sets, you can pop it in the microwave or over a rubber boiler again, and then use it again. So it's going to be easier, and it sets faster. Then it's not tricky like couverture chocolate. My advice would be to, although I showed chocolate chips in this video, the reason why I showed chocolate chips in this video is because they're accessible to anyone. They're the easiest to find. But I would advise you to stay away from chocolate chips because you can use them like as if for you can melt them like and use them once, but whenever you remelt them again, they lose their texture and then they have like a powdery texture with it, which is very ugly. It's just gonna go in the garbage. So stick to candy melts um, or couverture chocolate. And the second tip would be just follow, like just stick to a process and follow that. So it's pretty easy. You add the first coat, you coat the sides, you tap it, and then the excess chocolate will go on the bottom. So you have secured the bottom, and the bottom is now a thick layer of chocolate. You're just gonna set it in the fridge or freezer, which is faster, and then you're going to add a second coat on the sides to make sure that your sides have a thick layer. And as I explained earlier, what I do is I place my mold in the light so you can see if you have any gaps, and you're going to add more chocolate to that. And make sure you add your Cakesicle stick before the first coat fully sets, and you're going to proceed from there. Don't add too much batter to make sure that you have enough space to add the chocolate and get a smooth finish. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. So it's okay to place the cake pops in the freezer when using tempered chocolate. If it sits out on the counter for a few minutes, it does taste much better. Yes, that's correct. Couverture chocolate tastes way better than candy melt. It's okay to, yes, to place them in the freezer. As I stated earlier, that some chefs state that tempered chocolate the tempering will be ruined in the freezer. But I found that if you allow it to set for like 5 minutes, let's say 5 to 10 minutes at room temperature, and then pop it in the freezer, I never had any issues with the tempering. Yes, the chocolate I used is the Calbo. They have an Instagram page. I think you can, and there are many retailers that have this brand. It's a very known brand. And if you used candy melts and never used this type of chocolate, you're gonna notice a big difference. And it's I think it's the best option to use when if you make any chocolate covered strawberries. This is way easier with dipping because it has a thinner consistency than candy melts. Anyone has any other questions? For anyone who's joining now, you're going to be able um, to replay the class. So you're going to receive a link to the class, and you're going to be able to replay this live all over again. Thank you, Katie. That's really sweet. So you should be able to receive a link to this live after we are done with the class. You should receive the email from Sugar Art. So again, you can exit the meeting whenever you want. I'm gonna stay here until 12. If anyone has any questions, you can unmute your microphones and ask them, or simply write them in the chat. Yes, absolutely. If you ever try any of my designs, you can absolutely tag me. I would love to see your work. Thank you. Have a great weekend too. I'm glad you found this I'm glad you found this class helpful, Sandra. I'm sorry you couldn't join, Paige. I really hope that the replay of the class is going to be useful. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out on my Instagram DMs or via email, whatever you prefer, and I'll be happy to assist you. And of course, if any of you ever create the Cakesicle, please tag me. I would love to see your creations. Thank you, Stacy, and thank you for joining. You can use the icing sheets to cover cakes. If you want to use the sheets I used, you have to go to the section of chocolate transfer sheets. And if you want to buy something from the Angela Morrison collection, you can select any design you want And then on each design, you can actually select which type of sheet you want. And you can also add, you can also buy some customized sheets, so with whatever picture you want. And if you have any questions with how to cover cakes with icing sheets, let me know. Any of you have any other questions, or would it be okay to end the meeting? Okay. Well, thank you for joining me today. I really hope you have a great weekend. And again, if you have any questions, you can reach out. You have my contact info on the PDF you received. Bye.